All right, so just a reminder, getting into things, we are dealing with the letter that Paul wrote to the Galatian churches and kind of the key places on the map. This down here is Jerusalem, so this is the area of Israel. Up here is Antioch. This is Antioch of Syria. This is where Paul is as he is writing. And then these are the churches that Paul went to on his first journey. And so, at least the churches of Galatia that Paul went to on his first journey. And so those are the recipients of this letter. And that's kind of the problem area. And so we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's really important that we understand this background information so that the text itself can make more sense to us. But the real issue that's going on are what's called Judaizing teachers. And if you recall, the Judaizing teachers, these are Jewish Christians. They're not, antagonistic towards Christianity. They're Christians. But they firmly believe that a Gentile must become a Jew before that Gentile can be saved. Now, what are some of the reasons why they might believe that? I took too long before I had you engage. Mike's coming down. He's just going to choose someone at random here, I think. John, you got some reasons? Or you... Mike? Okay, Cliff put his hand up.
Circumcised.
Okay, but why did they feel like a Gentile?
Be under the old law first.
Okay, but why would they feel that a Gentile needs to be under the old law to be saved? Okay, all right, say that again into the mic.
They were the seed, not Christ.
Okay, because this has a lot to do with the seed in Genesis chapter 12/22. Remember the promise that's given? In you, all the families of the earth, or in your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. They understood the seed to be Israel. And so this blessing is going to extend from Israel. Why else? Okay, Paul isn't from Jerusalem, and we'll talk about that when we once again reiterate this. But Josie also said that you see Jerusalem's kind of been the center of Christianity, which means for a number of years, Christians were only what? Jewish. There were no Gentile Christians. You have a long period of time transpiring before you finally have Gentile Christians, and that, at this point in time, that's still a relatively new thing. We do have our first Gentile church in Antioch, but even then, there are a lot of Jews there, Jewish Christians, because people were sent up from Jerusalem, and they came. Barnabas being one of those, he went and he grabbed Paul, who was over here in Tarsus, and brought him over. And then you have the first journey where the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Paul and Barnabas and send them out. And remember, they went down to Cyprus and they came up Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. And so you have all of those churches there. All of that's on the first journey. And then he comes back. We kind of got into this last week as we started creating some kind of a timeline as you start to follow Paul in chapters 1 and 2. And he starts talking about all the times that he goes to Jerusalem after he's become a Christian. Now, why would he want to spend time talking about the times that he's been in Jerusalem? What'd you say earlier, Josie? Okay, all right. So Josie just said because Paul is not from Jerusalem, or at least the Christian Paul is not from Jerusalem. What did Paul do while he was in Jerusalem? Yes, but as far as Christianity is concerned, what did Paul do in Jerusalem? No, he persecuted the church, right? You know, when he grew up and he was there, and so he was there in Jerusalem and he was persecuting the Christians. And it wasn't until he left Jerusalem and was making his way up here to Damascus, and so as he's going up to Damascus, he is then caught. We have the conversion experience, the road to Damascus, and then he comes to Jerusalem right away? No. How long does it take him before he... 3 years. All right, well, you look back in Acts chapter 9. And you have the first instance here of him coming back to Jerusalem. So you have his Acts 9 experience where he is converted. And then in verse 37, Connie, you want to say it louder again? How long is it?
3 years.
All right. You have in did I say verse 37? The year 37. And so this is going to be around verse 26 that Paul comes up to Jerusalem again. And so that has now been 3 years that have passed. And that allows him, though, when he comes, to sit down and spend a lot of time with all of the apostles, making sure that everyone's Christianity is the same. Right? Is that what happens? How long does he spend there? Someone whispered 15 days. I think I heard it. Yeah, 15 days, approximately 2 weeks. And then he leaves. Who did he see? All right, he saw Cephas, Peter, he saw James, and did he see any of the other apostles? No, and so he's just there for a couple weeks, sees just a couple of the apostles, and then he takes off. So he is not what you would call a grounded apostle with all of the other apostles. Does that make sense? Again, we kind of have this picture that they're all just one big happy group and they know each other and, everything's all hunky-dory. I don't think that was the case. And you see that in really this letter because Paul's going to talk about his next time that he goes to Jerusalem. And his next time is when? You guys are like, it's on the board, right? I mean, you really want me to answer a question when you just pointed at it on the board, right? Yeah. So his next trip is going to be in AD 48. How do we know that? Where did I pull that number out? Okay, so Galatians chapter 2, when he starts in on the next section after an interval of 14 years. And I think what he's doing is he is timing everything from back to his original conversion. So it's 3 years from that he went to Jerusalem for the first time. And then 14 years from that he goes to Jerusalem a second time. And so this is really, he left Jerusalem in Acts 9, comes back in 37, comes back in 48. That is all that he's been really known at all. And even then, when he came back in chapter 9, did they greet him with the hero's welcome? No, they were like, all right, you really expect us to believe that you who were just persecuting us, you're coming back and now you're one of us? That's a little hard for us to get. So Paul doesn't have a great relationship with the church in Jerusalem. And I think it's important that we understand that and we see that. And so why is it that I believe that Galatians 2 is Acts 11 and not Acts 15? This is kind of where we ended up last week. Because most people will, in fact, I think probably, judging by some of the comments, a lot of folks here previously assumed that Galatians chapter 2 was actually Acts 15. Galatians chapter 2 is when they went up and, verse 3, not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. And the matter arose because false brothers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom that we have in Christ. People that were wanting Titus to be circumcised, and they had a discussion about that. Why do people assume that's Acts 15? Right, because in Acts 15, isn't that what they discuss? Don't they talk about whether or not a Gentile needs to be circumcised in order to become a Christian? And you had certain of the sect of the Pharisees who had believed, who stood up and said it is necessary for them to follow the law of Moses. It's necessary for them basically to become a Jew, to follow the law of Moses, so that then salvation will be open to them. And we know in Acts 15, who stood up and started talking? Peter, gets up and starts talking, saying, no, that's not right. And then who gets up and starts talking? Well, before James, two people. It's Paul and Barnabas, right? Paul and Barnabas get up and start talking, and they recount all the things that God's been doing among the Gentiles. And then James stands up and says, hey, maybe we ought to look at the scriptures themselves, which indicate that, yeah, this is going to be the case. And then they write up an edict of some sort that's like, yeah, you don't have to become circumcised, but hey, you Gentiles out there, don't do these things. Because these are the things that if you are with Jews and you do these things, you are causing them to be unable to associate with you. You cannot do these things and, try to have a group with Gentiles and Jews together at the same time. So they say, don't do these things. So, why do I assume it's Acts 11 instead of Acts 15? You guys are like, you're the one assuming, you tell us. Well, we talked about it last week, right? Gave some reasons why. What do y'all think? Yep. Oh, over here. Yep.
I'm going to say, for one thing, Galatians 2 doesn't mention the decree that was reached.
Okay, go ahead and say that one more time.
Galatians 2 doesn't mention the decree that was reached at
Yeah.
the Acts 15 meeting.
Yeah, very good. If they have a writing very specifically about this that they are distributing out among the churches, you would think that Paul would say, hey, remember that paper that we sent to you that talked about this issue and clarified things? Let me direct you to that and reiterate what it says. But there's no mention of it. as if it doesn't yet exist as he's writing this. So yeah, that is top tier as far as things that make sense that Galatians 2 does not equal Acts 15. And I would say that Galatians is written in 49. Galatians is written before Acts 15. All right, what else? Any other reasons? Why did they say that they went in Galatians? Why did they say that they went up to Jerusalem? Yeah, Richard?
Jerusalem's kind of a mountain.
Okay. All right, very good. Anytime that you, even if you're coming down, as we would see it, to go up to Jerusalem, it's an elevation thing. So they are going up to Jerusalem. All right, very good. So in Galatians, though, what was the purpose behind it? Yeah. Okay, that there was a revelation that had been given. What's that revelation in Acts chapter 15? Do you remember why they went to Jerusalem in Acts 15? Was there a prophet giving a revelation in Acts 15? Well, not in Acts 15. In Acts 15, there were people who came from Jerusalem to Antioch, and they started trying to teach this, and Paul was like, nope, we're not doing that. Let's go to Jerusalem and let's talk about this. But, as Mike just mentioned, in Acts chapter 11, is there a prophet with a revelation? Yeah, there's Agabus, who talks about the famine that's coming, and they need to collect money so they can send it there. So there is that in Acts chapter 11, and also, and this is really, this is where we're going to start focusing now. What help did the leadership give in Acts chapter 15? Was the leadership helpful? Who was the first one to stand up and side with Paul and Barnabas? It was Peter. Who else stood up after them? James. The whole group said, yeah, this is a good idea. They got everybody on board, right? And yet in Galatians 2, does Paul speak favorably about the leadership and how helpful they were? He does not. In fact, quite the opposite. He kind of has some snarky remarks that he makes about them. He says, let's see, now those who are recognized as important, what they were, I don't care. It makes no difference to me. God shows no favoritism. Who are the ones who are regarded as important or recognized as important? Yeah. These are the apostles, the elders, the leaders of the group. And he says, they added nothing to me. On the contrary, they just simply saw that I'd been entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, the same way Peter was for the circumcised. So, he talks about those recognized in verse 9, when James, Cephas, and John, those recognized as pillars, and you can almost see the sarcasm dripping there, the recognized as pillars. Yeah, what kind of pillars are they? Acknowledge the grace that had been given to me, and they gave the right hand of fellowship to me and Barnabas. You can just read the words, or you can put the words within a context, and they suddenly start affecting the way that you read the words and what's there. And these phrases, they're not important. God doesn't show favoritism. These so-called leaders, phrases such as that, it becomes very clear that that Paul does not put a whole lot of stock in these people. So, now we get to the heart of this issue. Why? If this was an issue. Now, first of all, let me say this. Do you think that Peter, John, or any of the others that we're talking about, do you think that they believed this? Boy, you guys are pausing a lot more than I thought you should. This should be a big fat no on this one, right? They are entrusted with the gospel. Who was the first one to go out to a Gentile and bring the Gentile into Christianity? Peter. Did Peter, in any way, shape, or form, try to tell this individual, now don't forget, we got to circumcise you first? No. All right? So, don't mistake the way that Paul's talking about this and the way the situation's working. Don't take that to mean that this is being condoned, taught, that this is the pervasive thought. I think this is a very clear, small, tiny minority that is actively going out and teaching this. And it's not coming from the leadership. But what is the problem with the leadership? Particularly in Acts chapter 11. Mike? Okay, say that again.
They're accommodating.
Okay, they are accommodating. What were you going to say, Jeff? Perception. Okay, perception. All right. All right. Mike, can you expound a little bit more on accommodating?
Well, they don't want to disenfranchise or push away those who are of the Pharisaic persuasion, so they start to make accommodation for them so that they can have peace, if you will.
Okay.
But
all right.
it means they separate themselves somewhat from the Gentile brethren.
All right. Very good. And we're not there yet. I think what you were talking about, we're going to see it, though. Very clearly, we're going to see that. But I think Mike is absolutely right with what's taking place here. They know that people believe this, and that there are some people who think that this is the case, but they don't fight against it. They are accommodating. They don't believe it themselves. Peter, John, the rest of the apostles, James, the other ones, they don't teach this, but they know that there are those who think this, but they don't teach against it because they want to make peace. They want to accommodate it. The way that Paul puts it, they want to please people. You know, and consider for a second, how important is it for them to teach against this? For Peter, James, you know, these people in Jerusalem, how important is it for them to teach that a Gentile needs to become a Jew to be saved? Mike?
They're not addressing very many Gentiles. It's a minor thing for them. It becomes a major thing the farther you get from Jerusalem.
Yeah. That'd be like, I don't know, if there was a group of people, and analogies always break down, you know, that especially ones that you try to come up with on the spot. Let's just say that, there were some people who believed that you could not be a Christian if you were a professional Major League Baseball player. Because, you know, you have to play on Sundays, and you spend so much time away from your family, and you don't have very long of an off season and stuff like that. And therefore, they firmly believe that you could not be in Major League Baseball and be a Christian at the same time. How important would that be for me to preach this from the pulpit here? Would that be important? Why not?
Don't have too many professional baseball players.
Okay, there aren't very many professional baseball players here. There's not even any in Salem because Salem doesn't even have a team, right? It's pointless for us to spend our time getting into a controversial type of discussion where some people over here are going to say, well, that's not right. You know, they should be able to play if they want to, and then you have people on the other side, no, no, no. You know, we absolutely have to condemn this, even though it's a topic that has no bearing on us at all. Maybe the best thing to do is just simply to ignore it, is the idea. Because why rock a boat that doesn't need to be rocked, right? You know, in Jerusalem, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. They don't have to go around teaching about what Gentiles have to do because there aren't Gentiles that are a part of this. You know, predominantly speaking, this is a Jewish community. That changes, as Mike said, the further that you get away, where you go from a predominantly Jewish community to now a predominantly Gentile community. Maybe, say, these churches. And when Paul, in Acts chapter 11, comes down to Jerusalem, and he has Titus there, and they're like, hey, Titus is going to be circumcised, right? And Paul's like, why would Titus be circumcised? And then they look at him like, because he has to be circumcised? Duh. He has to become a Jew. And Paul's like, no, he doesn't. And they go back and forth and back and forth. And then you have the apostles on the side who are like, guys, this isn't even something that needs to be dealt with right now. Let's just let it be. All right? And they say to Paul, Paul, go do what you do among the uncircumcised. You know, and we extend a right hand of fellowship towards you. And we say, all right, you go take care of that. We'll deal with what's happening here among the circumcised. Now, that might sound helpful. It might sound like a good approach. It might sound like we're keeping peace. But was it very helpful? No. What's the problem if you don't deal with it at least in some small kind of a way? The problem's going to get bigger. And as Paul comes out here to these Gentile churches and starts, or Gentile cities, and starts forming churches here, and that word gets back down to Jerusalem, where they've had a conversation with Paul, and they know that Paul doesn't teach this, and there are certain ones in Jerusalem who believe that he should. What might they end up doing once they find out that Paul was there? They might start sending people up here to say, hey, you know that Paul? He's a great guy. He knows his Bible, but he's mistaken because he doesn't teach the entire gospel. Let us give you the rest. Well, what right do you have? I mean, we like Paul a lot. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But you realize Paul is from Antioch, not from Jerusalem. Paul was not one of the original apostles. Paul has barely spent any time in Jerusalem at all. We come from the heart of Christianity, Jerusalem itself. Now, who do you trust more? This guy who's kind of just been up here and who came by for a little bit, or us who actually come from Jerusalem itself? Can you see why these people would trust these people from Jerusalem? And they would go into this. And so now Paul is writing, and I know we're getting back to our introductory stuff. I'm hoping you're seeing that this this idea keeps on going out. Paul defends his apostleship to them, right? And really he does that by disassociating himself from Jerusalem. He went there in Acts 9. He left in Acts 9, and then 3 years later he went back. 14 years later, he goes back, and then he writes Galatians in 49. By the way, first journey is between these two sections. I didn't write that on there, but that's where you would find it. The first journey obviously takes place before he writes Galatians, and obviously before Acts chapter 15. All right, so we continue in Galatians chapter 2. All right, before we move on, are there questions on this? Some of y'all that are like, you don't buy it, maybe you're not following. Maybe you're like, I don't get why this is so important. Questions or comments from anyone? All right, because we're going to move on at this point. All right, so in Galatians chapter 2, you get to verse 11. In verse 11, we are, at this point, does he say anything like, and after so many years? That's a yes or no question at the beginning of verse 11. No, thank you. Yeah, we're breaking our timeline here, in other words. He's been giving us a timeline of his interactions with Jerusalem. Yeah, he's done with that. So this does not necessarily chronologically have to follow everything that he's just stated. At some point before AD 49, when it was, I couldn't tell you. I have a guess, but that's the best that I have. But sometime before AD 49, who came to Antioch? All right, Peter came to Antioch. And just to once again solidify in our minds, does Peter buy this? Does he believe this? No. How do we know that? Okay, because he's the one that stands up in Acts 15, talks about how he had gone to the Gentiles. We know he was the first one to go to, Sharon just said Cornelius, the first Gentile. It comes through him. Yeah, Mike?
Was eating with the Gentiles till they came. So he was all cool with them being not Jewish.
Yeah. So chapter 2, starting verse 11, when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For he regularly ate with the Gentiles before certain men came from James. However, when they came, he withdrew, separated himself, because he feared those from the circumcision party. Then the rest of the Jews joined his hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were deviating from the truth of the gospel, I told Cephas in front of everyone, if you, who are a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel Gentiles to live like Jews? And then you have the rest of his thing, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to make sure we're setting this up properly. So Peter comes to Antioch. So he comes up here, and again, he doesn't tell us why, the circumstances that are around it, but he comes up, and as Mike said, he just fits right in. He has no qualms accepting the Gentile Christians, eating with them, spending time with them. It's no big deal. Everything's fine until what happens?
Jerusalem.
Okay, there's some folks who come from Jerusalem, men who came from James. All right, first of all, let me ask this. Why does Paul single out Peter here? He's just made his argument about Jerusalem. He goes, and yeah, Cephas came one time. Why does he start transitioning to talking about Peter? No thoughts on that? Because he's from Jerusalem. Not only is he from Jerusalem, but what? Okay, he's an apostle. Maybe if you can bump it up a little bit. Isn't he kind of like the main spokesman type apostle there in the early portions of things? The first one to bring in the Jews, the first one who brought in a Gentile, the one who kind of holds the torch throughout the beginning of Acts. Really, the first 12 chapters, predominantly about the apostles, are about Peter and his place. He has a very, very significant role that he plays. He is singled out quite often when it comes to talking about the apostles in Jerusalem. He is very much singled out. And so people know who Peter is. And it very well could be that people who come from Jerusalem and claim the authority of Jerusalem might also be claiming the authority of Peter at the same time. And so Paul says, all right, you want to talk about Peter? We can talk about Peter. We can talk about Cephas. What about Cephas on this issue? Does he have the greatest track record? No. I mean, he was, like we said, he was fine until who showed up again? People from Jerusalem, from James, but really. Oh, by the way, have we not just mentioned the two that he associated with Jerusalem earlier in chapter 1, right? I didn't see anyone except for Cephas or James, the Lord's brother. Didn't see any of the other apostles. So he's now singled out those two individuals yet again here in chapter 2. And these individuals represent Jerusalem in the minds of the people that he's talking to, those to whom he's writing. So yeah, let's look at their track record. Now again, just because they are men from James, does that mean they were teaching this? Okay, very good. No, that doesn't necessitate that. However, when they show up, what happens? Well, I don't know what to erase here. I'm just going to make this a little... it's not really a court trial, so we'll do that. All right, so let's see. You've got Gentile folks over here, right? Oops. Look like a beard or something right there. All right. And then you've got Peter, which, I don't know, can you even see that? All right. All right, so sort of. All right. Then you have men from James come. Is that better than the red at least? Someone say not much? All right. So what does Peter do at this point? It turns green. We'll just do an arrow over here. Peter now comes over here. And even who else? All right, Barnabas, who's been clearly just one of the guys over here, right? Even Barnabas feels compelled to disassociate himself with the rest of the Gentiles in order to accommodate, which is the word that Mike used earlier, to accommodate the Jews over here who've come. And I don't think it's because they've asked them to. I don't think it's because they teach this or they believe this. I think it has everything to do with the word, I don't know if it's Jeff earlier said this, perception. They're trying to give off the proper perception. They want to make sure that the folks in Jerusalem aren't going to all of a sudden have a real tough issue to deal with. You know, when they come up and they see this, and then they're going to have to start answering questions and figuring this out and asking why and going. It's just easier if you don't rock the boat. But is it? Are we even in Jerusalem anymore? No. You might be able to get away with that in Jerusalem. You're not going to get away with that in Antioch or any other predominantly Gentile area, because it's real there. It is an issue. It is a problem. And it needs to be addressed instead of continuing to do whatever practices were done before. Which is why when Peter separates himself out, and when even Barnabas does so, Paul feels compelled to stand up to Peter and call him out on this. In fact, how did he call him out? All right. He calls him a hypocrite, and I think somebody said to his face over here. Calls him out to his face itself, and verse 14. I told Cephas in front of whom? In front of everyone. Well, that's not how you're supposed to handle a disagreement, is it? Aren't you supposed to take a person off to the side and instruct them privately off to the side? Why would Paul do this? Yeah, Kathy? Okay, say that again.
I think it's important that everybody can see it. I mean, this is a problem for everybody, and they all need to know.
Yeah. Who's been affected here by this? Yeah, these are real people over here. And I don't know if you've ever been in the cafeteria, middle school or whatever the case is, and you're sitting at a table, and then some of the cool kids sit down, and 2 or 3 of the kids that are sitting around you decide you're not cool enough, and they go over to sit with them. Does that affect you in any way? When all of a sudden Peter doesn't want to sit with you anymore, Barnabas doesn't want to sit with you anymore, they now want to be with these guys right here. Does that do anything to you as a Gentile? You better believe it. And Paul, in front of everyone, says, this separation thing is not right. This isn't a problem that needs to be dealt with on the side with individuals, and you say, hey, you really shouldn't have done that. He needs to stand up for these people who don't have the opportunity to stand up for themselves, because he is an apostle of Jesus Christ, and he has the authority. Ryan first, by the way. He has the authority and he has the right to stand up against Peter and say, in order to defend these people over here who have been hurt and slighted, and to say that's not right. What you got, Ryan?
So I'm just thinking about, if the cities had been switched and the visitors had been Gentiles to Jerusalem, but same situation, would Paul still have done that? I think he would have. just because of Paul's character and his consistency.
Yeah, he is the
And
one.
so I guess my question is, do you think the Gentiles still would have been shunned in Jerusalem?
He is the one who stood up for Titus when they were trying to compel Titus to become circumcised. And it would be a little bit different in that Gentiles would carry no sway. Nobody's going to be leaving the ranks of the Jews to go sit with Gentiles, in Jerusalem as the case is. So it wouldn't be an apples to apples comparison. But absolutely, Paul over and again shows himself to be the one who will side with what's right, as far as how people are treating each other. He shows it here. I'm with you. I think he would do the same in Jerusalem. Yeah, Jen.
It's about their souls. He says in 14, but when I saw they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, and that's the basis of everything, it was messed up, the base that they were coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to close on that right there. We're about out of time. Yes, although I would say you can pull someone aside privately and talk about a matter that's important to their soul. Absolutely. But from what Jan is getting across here, it is the severity of this particular issue and how important it is, in that these people probably didn't even realize what they were doing and what it meant and the effect that they were having on somebody else. It was a subconscious thing that it didn't even cross their mind, I think, until Paul points it out. But I really think he points it out in front of everyone very specifically because these people needed to see a champion step up and defend them. They needed to see, yes, this is what's right. This is wrong. And we have someone who is willing to fight to make sure that the wrongs get righted. All right, we're over time, so good class, guys. We're going to go into, as Jan was bringing us into, verses 15 and following next week. So, thanks a lot.